Hello and welcome to Run with Horses. This is Norman, and today I'm joined by my special guest. One of them you know well. This is Chloe, my daughter.
That's me.
I claim her most of the time.
I claim you most of the time.
And we're joined by another special guest, Hope, and I forgot your last name.
Ketchum.
Hope Ketchum. And the cool thing about today is that both of these young ladies are missionary kids. Not from the same country, however. So we're expecting some differences in maybe the way that they grew up and the way that they see life in general and probably America. So today we don't have a special topic. We're just going to talk to these young ladies, and they're both students at Faith Baptist Bible College. And are you preparing for ministry, Hope? Are you?
I'm studying missionary nursing.
Missionary nursing,
Yep.
okay. I didn't catch that part. I knew the nursing, but
Yeah.
okay. So missionary nursing, and then Chloe's planning to go back to Japan at the moment. So thank you guys for joining me.
Last notice.
Last minute special guest.
Yeah.
But I'm going to start because I don't really know Hope and say, could you just give me a little bit of your history, who you are and your family, and I don't know if you were born in Brazil and all that kind of thing. So if you could just give us a little bit of your history, that would be awesome.
So my grandpa and my dad both grew up in Brazil, actually, in the same location where I grew up. So that's pretty cool. And I grew up most of my life in the Amazon at a school surrounded three sides by jungle, and the Amazon River is right in front. And I have 4 younger siblings, and my parents live in a dorm, so they're like the dorm parents, and we have 20 usually kids every semester that come to stay in our dorm from anywhere from 5th grade to 8th grade is who we have in our dorm. And yeah.
So you grew up in a school.
Yep, I grew up in a school. Yep.
So your first day of school was probably really early. So you were born there?
I was not. I was born here in the States, actually in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
None of us, well, Mom was born in Wisconsin.
No.
But no, she wasn't?
I don't think so. Was
Really?
she?
I think she was. I think she was born in Milwaukee. But the rest of us were all born outside of Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
So how old were you when you went to Brazil then?
Probably 4,
Okay.
yeah.
So your earliest memories would be Brazil or
Yeah,
just...
I don't really remember the States other than, my first furlough. And even that is kind of, I don't remember very much of my first furlough. It was in like 4th grade maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your first furlough, you were 5?
Yeah.
So the time she was going to Brazil, you were coming to America for the first time?
Yeah, and I remember parts, like bits and pieces of that first furlough. But
Okay, so before we go too far in the direction I want to go, I want to ask kind of both of you, maybe give a summary of what life was like kind of growing up in the school years, through junior high, high schoolish. So what was life like for you? Because Chloe grew up in Japan homeschooled, and then you grew up in Brazil, and I'm assuming you went to the school there.
Yeah, a boarding school, yeah.
So what was life like then for you there at the boarding school?
The summers were very quiet because none of the students were there, obviously. So it was very different in the summer. But when all the kids would come, it was lots of people. And it was more normal, I guess, for me. And classes would start at 7:45. And we'd go through our classes, have sports in the afternoons, and usually always ended our day with swimming in the river. And then we'd have study hall at night. And both dorms would eat our meals all together in the dining hall. So we would get to see each other very often, which was fun and nice.
So growing up like that, where your parents were kind of like the dorm parents, what was your relationship like with the other students? Like particularly before you went to school, did you see them more as like brothers and sisters, or what was your relationship like with them? You obviously saw them a lot.
Yeah, so our family ran the dorm kind of like when the students came to live with us, they were a part of our family. So we did everything together. Our family never did anything that was just our family while the other students were there. Family time was only for the summer and for Christmas. So while the other students were there, like when I was in middle school, I lived in the dorm. I lived in the dorm's girls' side, and I did everything with them. So they were just like my sisters, and I had lots of brothers. So they were always a part of our family. We never made that divide kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought it would be like. Okay, so Chloe, just contrasting that, what was life like for you growing up in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously homeschooling is a lot different than going to an actual, physical school. So I did a lot of my work just on my own. School would start at like 8-ish. Mom didn't really like us to start too late, but it really didn't matter. Just get up and eat breakfast and start school. And then Mom would give us like a list of things. You have to have all of this done today. And we'd just go through the list and we'd go, okay, I did my math, I did my English, and if I needed any help, I would go to her and be like, Mom, help me. Yeah. And then getting up into junior high school, it became more and more, I could do everything on my own and almost never needed Mom because all of my books came with the teaching in it. So I just would read, like for math, they had like several pages and I just read about what I'm learning and then try to put it into practice. Not very well, but so, yeah, very solitary.
Yeah.
So for you, Mom was very hands-on early, and then it kind of got more and more hands-off as you got older.
Right.
For the school in Brazil, you had a teacher for every class or a teacher for certain grades, or how did that work?
In middle school, it was usually like 2 grades together, and we'd have like 5th and 6th would be in a classroom, 7th and 8th. And then we'd do like science class all together. And then each year, like the grade would change. Like for 1 year, we do 6th grade math or science. And then the other year would be 7th grade science. And so we just kind of like rotate back and forth. But we would change teachers depending on the subject. And then high school, for some classes we were all together, like all 4 grades, and then some classes we'd separate. So it really just depended also on how many teachers we had on staff, of how many classes we had to combine, and different things like that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And you said you did sports, so I'm assuming you did a lot of soccer in Brazil.
Yeah, so our whole entire fall semester was soccer, and then our spring semester was volleyball. And those were the 2 main sports that we could do, because we would compete against like different churches from the city. Okay. And so we kind of have to be able to play sports that they can do. And basketball is not really that common. Yeah. So I wasn't really exposed to basketball until I came to the States.
Okay. Yeah. And so Chloe, you didn't do team sports. What did you do?
No, I did karate, which is it's not really a team sport. They try to make it one in Japan. It's like everybody's on a team, we're all going together, but it's you and yourself. How much can you do and how strong can you get? Mm-hmm. And I'm a black belt. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
So there was a lot of work went into that. So, all right. So you graduated from the school in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what year are you at Faith?
I'm a freshman.
Freshman at Faith.
Yep.
And then Chloe graduated from the Smith Homeschool Academy. I don't think that's the official name that we used.
I think we used like the Smith School of Higher Learning or something. I think that might be on my diploma.
It's a cool name.
It's a prestigious school.
Yeah.
It's hard to graduate from there.
Oh, yeah.
We have
We only have 3 graduates.
limited spaces for new students. So your school in Brazil, you said you had around 20 students each semester or each year?
Yeah, I had 20 students in our dorm, in the middle dorm. And then you'd have like 20 more students in the high dorm for the high school. Okay. And then, of course, whatever other staff kids. So maybe 40 to 50 from 5th grade to 12th grade.
Okay, so it's pretty good size.
Yeah, so that was when I was there. When my dad was growing up, there were way more kids.
Mm-hmm. So how far were students coming to be part of that school?
So we had people coming from South Brazil, so from like São Paulo, and others also from the Amazon region. But most of them did not live, like most lived remotely, right, far away. Their parents were far. Mm-hmm. Have to take an airplane to get there, that kind of a thing. We did have one girl one time, her mom was in India, and that was a little far. But for most part, everyone is in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. So did you get to know the other missionaries? Or were there other local missionaries who weren't sending their kids hours away, but other families that you got to know?
Like from other missions?
Other missions or same mission, but just other missionary families. Were there others in the area?
Yeah. We have a mission base, I guess, in the nearest city. So whenever we'd go out, we could see families there. And we'd have also a lot of like ethnos or New Tribes Mission Brazil missionaries. They would come out to the school to just visit. And they didn't necessarily have their kids there, but they would just come out to visit for the day and hang out because it's a very good place, I guess, to have like a vacation kind of a thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So did you have like what in Japan we would call like field council meetings and things like that? That was part of life too?
Yep. So we would host our West Brazil field conferences. And so then we'd have like around 200 missionaries come to the school. And so it would be a lot of people at our little school. But it was fun to get to hear how things were going where they were in the tribes and stuff.
Yeah. So that's a far cry different than ours. And so tell a little bit about we had an annual conference every year that we went to.
So the annual conference really wasn't very much different than our, like, every other month. What's that? Bi-monthly? Not bi-monthly. Anyway, it wasn't very much different. There's pretty much the same group of missionaries that would come, like 5 or 6 units, whether that's a couple or if it's a family, a few singles. It was very small. The only difference was for the annual meeting, we got to go to a hotel, and that was super cool because it had like a pool and like.
We didn't have the Amazon outside the back.
Yeah. And
of course, that was on the ocean, so we did have the ocean.
Yeah,
you go to the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so you were there from 4 until you started college. Is that?
Yeah, basically.
Correct?
I had 2 furloughs. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what were your furloughs like?
My first furlough, I was in 4th grade. We were in Pennsylvania with my mom's family, and we went to a school nearby, I guess, small school, and then in the summers, I guess we travel around visiting our supporting churches. And so in the summer and Christmas time, we do a lot of traveling, not so much during the school year, just because we were all in school. And then my sophomore year, we were in Kansas with my dad's family at a small Christian school there. And it was kind of the same thing. We're in school for the semester, and then we go traveling in the summer.
Okay, so Chloe, kind of what were our furloughs like?
Well, we took our school on the road with us.
That's unfortunate.
It is. It really is. Like, we started out doing year-long furloughs. We did, I think, 2 of those. And that was a little bit different than we wouldn't travel quite as much during the semester, I feel like. Like, we would be kind of at one place during the week and then travel on the weekends. But then more recently, we would have like 4 to 6 month furloughs.
3 to 4 month furloughs?
3 to 4 month. I think we did a 6 month furlough. It felt long. But for those, that's pretty much rapid fire. You're taking your school with you the whole way, and it's kind of hard to study in that environment. But yeah, just pretty much for the shorter furloughs, you're in a different church every week. And it's kind of crazy.
That would be the story of our life. So, Hope, do you have siblings?
Yep, I have 4 younger siblings. Yeah, the 4 of us are one right after the other, so we're all 1 year apart. So we're all pretty close. And then there's like a surprise child who's like 7 right now, I think. Yeah. Yep.
And they're all in Brazil now?
Yeah, they're all in Brazil. Mm-hmm.
All right. So are any of them planning to come to faith?
One of my sisters is thinking about it. Yeah, she's interested in playing soccer. I don't know, doing nursing at Faith maybe.
So you could potentially have one of them with you before you graduate?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Chloe has what?
I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and both of them are planning to be at Faith.
Yeah,
Very shortly, yes.
Are you excited?
I'm not sure.
Will faith be the same afterward?
We're all pretty quiet, so it shouldn't change much. But
So when you went on furloughs, Hope, Did you and your siblings, were you part of the presentation? Did you do things, or did just your dad do a presentation? Or what did your furloughs look like when you showed up at a church?
It really depended on how well the church knew us. Like, for the church that were more familiar with my parents and our family, then my dad would maybe give a short presentation of like how our 4 years had gone. And then he would like more do a sermon kind of a thing. So then we didn't participate as much. But then if churches didn't know as much of what we were doing, then he would do more of a lengthy thing. And we usually didn't participate that much. We just like stand up, you'd have to wave to everybody, say your name, that kind of a thing. But other than that, we didn't have to do very much. Stand by a table awkwardly, that kind of a thing.
I feel that.
Have everyone tell you, I remember you when you were so little. Like, I don't remember you.
So what were your furloughs like, Chloe?
When I was younger, I didn't participate as much. But I think every furlough, just about all of our families got up and will sing and do special music. Some churches don't have us do that, but a lot of them did. And then more recently, it would just be me, and I'd stand up and sing one of my original songs. I think the last 3 furloughs I've done that, at least a small amount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, furlough's always interesting. A lot of what the missionaries do depends on the church more so than the missionary. I mean, you can prepare whatever you want to, and then they take, you've got 5 minutes. Or you can prepare 10 minutes, and they say, you've got 3 services. So we've had all of those extremes. So what I was told early on was be prepared for anything and everything and be flexible. It's like, okay, that has absolutely been the case. So where are most of your supporting churches then? You said Pennsylvania, and then
we have churches all over, and even like not necessarily a church, but just individuals. A lot of people that went to college with my parents became pastors, and so then just connections through that way. So I think we have like Ohio, Indiana, I don't know, Kansas, it's Wisconsin, it's all over.
So your furlough will be pretty broad as far as the area you're traveling in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Chloe, for us, do you know what states we go to?
We go to Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, and Alabama.
Yep. So all of ours are in those. We tried to limit it unsuccessfully to just a couple of states, but not too bad. It's still lots of traveling. So what did your family do on the road when you're traveling? You had 4 of you. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of hours in the car, at least in our case, it was a lot of hours.
Yes.
So, that can be fun.
Yeah. Sometimes we come up with different games to play on the road, like the license plate game or different alphabet games, different things like that. Annoy each other. Always seem to happen somehow. That's the common one. We do a lot of reading. We'd take like a small thing of CDs, and then we'd go to the same movies over and over and over again. And that's usually how it was. Maybe sometimes listen to audiobook music. Yeah, I don't know.
Chloe, do you remember how much? There's a lot of variety in ours over the years.
Yeah, I feel like for the most part, though, all 3 of us like to read. So we would spend the whole time reading, particularly as we got older. When we were a little bit younger, then I would like to read, and the other 2 were not as cooperative. And I have distinct memories of one year we had a smaller car than normal, so all 3 of us had to be in a row on like the bench seat, which was absolutely my least favorite furlough of all time, because this was still at an age where my younger sister was a little more active than I would have preferred her to be. So she would just be bouncing all around, and she would get car sick, so she had to sit in the middle right next to me. And so I would be reading, and my brother would be reading, and she's in the middle going crazy. And I'm just like, would you sit still and stop bothering me?
Now, we started out in an old Chevy van that actually had a VHS TV and video player. Mm-hmm. So I remember you guys watching Teletubbies, which I hate.
You were driving. I'm sure you couldn't see it.
You could hear it.
Yeah, that's almost worse, just hearing it.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember. I seemed like there was, what's the little red Muppet?
Elmo?
Elmo, wasn't there something with Elmo?
I don't really remember using that much. I think that must have been mostly our first furlough. 'Cause by the second furlough, I think it had broken.
Thank goodness.
I liked that van. We had a mouse living in it for a while.
Yeah.
Mom left chocolate or something like between the front two seats, and we got in the next. Maybe it had sat for a couple days or something, and we got back in, and there were like bite marks taken out of the chocolate. We're like, ooh.
Unpleasant.
Yeah. So then every time I sat down on the seat, I'm like, is there a mouse somewhere?
So what was the best thing about Furlough, Hope?
I don't know, getting to see extended family that I usually don't get to see. I think that was a highlight. Or like getting to eat different snack foods that we don't have in Brazil. Yeah, I think that was probably my highlight. Family and snack foods.
Yeah.
And sweet candy.
Chloe?
I mean, obviously seeing family was always super fun. And then, particularly as I've gotten older, I've just been able to appreciate like visiting all the different churches and just seeing how different people do church. Like it's the same, we're all in the same body of Christ, but just how the service is laid out and how they do their music and just everything is a little bit different. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out across the states and just to get to connect with a bunch of different Christians all across the states, particularly after being in Japan for so long when there's just not a whole lot of Christians, just being able to come and know, hey, we're all in the same family. Mm-hmm. And it's been super encouraging.
And that's one thing, the second half of the show, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of how you guys' perspective of the church and Christianity is colored by where you grew up and that environment. Mm-hmm. And then how that has colored how you view the church and the American way of doing church, of doing Christian life and all those kind of things. So I want to hold off on that a little bit. But I think one more question before the break. What was the biggest shock coming back to the States? Or was there a big shock? Was it always just easy to come back? I guess if you were... How long were you between furloughs?
4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
Usually
so what was
closer
the
to
shock?
5.
What was the biggest shock or hardest to adjust to?
The first one we noticed was the roads. The roads are way better here. I don't know if that is a shock, but I don't know. U.S. seems very cold culture to me, coming from a warm culture, and so that was kind of hard to get used to. It's like, in Brazil, you meet someone, you go and give them a hug, even if you don't know them that well, or a handshake. And here, it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You know, it's just kind of trying to figure out some of the differences between, like, warm and cold cultures. And also, like, going to the store and everyone can speak the same language as you. Whereas, like, in Brazil, you know, we're talking in English, and no one will understand what we're saying. But we can understand them. And so, I don't know, it's just interesting. You have to kind of switch gears back to English.
I still remember one of our furloughs where we went to a Walmart or grocery store or something, and our kids were looking. I was like, "There are so many foreigners here." It's like, no, there actually are not many foreigners here. They may feel that way, but there are not. Okay, so we need to take a break. We'll come back and let Chloe answer that question at the top of the break, and then we want to talk a little bit more about just perceptions of what it means to follow Jesus based on culture, really. But we'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. And we're going to go ahead and start where we left off with thinking about coming back on furlough and what's something the most shocking or hardest to adjust to coming back on furlough, Chloe?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny because Hope was talking about how to her, America is a cold culture. But to me, coming from Japan, which is a very cold culture, America is a warm culture. So I had people in churches, you know, come up and hug me. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. This is weird. I don't know you. Why are you touching me? And so that was something I really had to get used to, or handshakes. Because in Japan, when you greet each other, you bow. You don't ever touch. You stay a certain distance apart so that you can both bow without knocking each other's heads. You know, so that's kind of your social distancing.
It's built into the Japanese.
Yes, it is. It really is. And so then coming here and having people stand really close to me or, come in for a hug, I'm like, oh, okay, family's like fine. It's a little weird when other people do it. And I've gotten used to it because it's not like I've never hugged people before, but it was just something I had to adjust to. Yeah. And then also the English thing. Like, oh, we all speak the same language. Yeah. Weird.
Yeah, no, for me, coming, particularly the first few terms in Japan, you're gone for 4 or 5 years, and then you come back. So, like, you forget about handshaking. And then, go into a church and somebody sticks out their hand, like, what? Oh, yeah, they do that here. That was weird for me, too. After a while, though, our furloughs were shorter, and we would come back every 2.5 years. So it was, I don't know, just more time going back and forth. It was easier to adjust. But, yeah, that's definitely was something that in the beginning is like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do that here, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so the second half, what I want to think more about and hear from you guys. You both grew up in 2 different cultures, and you've already mentioned a warm culture and a cold culture, and then there's America, which is somewhere in between those 2. And because of where you grew up and how you grew up, so some of it's not all culture, it's part of your family too, although probably for Hope, yours is really interesting because it's not just your family. We have this extended family, but your mom and dad would have still a lot of influence over how that family ran. So you'd have the culture and your family influence, and then coming back to the States brings in another third influence. So I'm kind of interested in how you've learned what it means to be a disciple and to follow Jesus and how you view the church and all those kind of things. But I want to start with Hope and ask, coming from Brazil and from where you were, when you were on furlough and you go to the different churches, what's your perception, or how I guess you could start with what's different about the way that church operates, or is it different? Maybe it's the same. I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
So at the school, more specifically, where we had 2 languages, English and Portuguese, because we always had someone either would not speak English or someone would not speak Portuguese. So all of our services were in both languages. So we had, we sang in English and Portuguese, and we also always had a translator, either from Portuguese to English or English to Portuguese. So that was something I had to kind of get used to, is it was just one language. And so I guess the sermons are a lot longer because, if you have a translator, you kind of got to make it a little shorter so that the person has time to translate. But that's something that was specifically at the school. That's something different, where it's in 2 languages. And also, we didn't have Sunday school or anything like that, or Wednesday night activities, or Sunday night or anything like that, because at the school, everything is kind of integrated into it. So like at night, both dorms have devotions. So it's kind of like there's no reason to have Wednesday night activities when you already do it every day. Or because of safety issues, we didn't have a Sunday night service, because that means that everyone would be in one building and no one along the river. And so it'd be, people could easily come onto property and we wouldn't know about it. So that's kind of why we don't have Sunday night services. And just different things where the context is different, so you kind of have to change it. And also depending on the staff that we had, that would also change how our service would go. Because I feel like here in the States, it's very much, from one church, it's always done like this. And with each church is kind of different, but the one church is always like that. But for us, it's kind of like it could change just because of people coming and going and how our circumstances were, which, I guess is different than here in the States.
Chloe, what's easy differences?
Yeah, it was different even in Japan between our Sunday evening service and then the Japanese service that I went to in the mornings. And definitely the most difference is between the Sunday morning service. I was the only American in the room. And typical Japanese services, they're very structured and formal. So every single time they start with, a scripture reading, they sing a certain amount of songs, they have this thing, they have this, and the, sermon only goes so long, and then you have announcements and whatever. And it's just and then even after the church, people are still a little bit formal, and it's kind of hard to get to know people very well. Whereas, like, coming here and the church that I'm going to now, even just people going and saying announcements, we have one specific pastor that says funny things during the announcements, but it's like, it feels more like everybody knows each other. We don't hate each other. We're all here because we want to be here. Mm-hmm. And before the service and after the service, there's a lot of talking and fellowship that goes on. So just the whole atmosphere is a lot different. Mm-hmm. So in Japan, you go in, you're like, okay, this is church. I had to be formal. Mm-hmm. And in America, it's not always like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a little more variety in America. There are churches that are pretty formal, and structured, but there's a little more variety. We still had the bilingual services quite often in the evening, where you had English and Portuguese. We had English and Japanese for most of the time in the evening. Kind of we consider an international service, but that's always different than America. Mm-hmm. So how did that color kind of how you grew up in that environment? How did that color how you viewed the American church when you came back?
I guess for me, since our church isn't as structured, or I guess how like you were using the word formal, it's not very formal. Like, we technically don't have a pastor or anything. And so coming here it seemed much more structured and formal, like where we always do it this way. And if you do something out of that order, then you're messing everything up. And so that was just kind of something that you have to get used to, I guess. I don't know. And yeah.
Yeah, to me, coming here was, well, first of all, the churches are so much bigger. Even small churches are often a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. So just being able to come into, a church building and be like, wow, all of these people are Christians and they're here because they want to be, want to worship the Lord. Like, wow, that's amazing. But also the fact that it's less formal. I do enjoy that. I sometimes felt like at the church in Japan, I had to like sit straight, and like, I know I didn't have to, but it's just like everyone's so quiet and solemn. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so coming here felt a lot more like a family. Like, and the fact that everybody knew each other in Japan too, but it's just it's hard to describe, but it's a very different feeling.
Mm-hmm. And we tried not to have that with the evening international service. It was much, talk about the formality, that's in the Japanese language only service pretty much, and that had a Japanese pastor. In anything where we were doing, there really wasn't much formality, close to none. Yeah. And even in the Japanese church, like, you could tell the people cared about each other. Mm-hmm. They just showed it in a different way. Right. And it was harder for me to see a lot of the time, because they would do events and things, and they all get along, and it's just a different type of thing. And that's some of the culture. Yeah. So how you show appreciation, how you relate to somebody, how you get to know someone. It's quite a bit different, particularly in a warm culture and a cold culture. And in America, somewhere in the middle. In Japan, it's a process of becoming a friend with somebody. And then some of the warm culture, just like you meet them and they're your best friend today. Yep. And in America, there are people like that, and there are people where it takes a little longer, but it's usually somewhere in the middle. But yeah, it's very different. So in the church in Brazil, I suppose you can maybe speak the tribal situation and whatever you know about churches outside of that as well. But what or how much is intentionally done with the disciple making as far as teaching other people to be disciple makers? Is that a big thing in the churches in Brazil, as far as you see that practiced? Or how did you, I don't know, you can answer that much, I suppose.
So for the tribal church planners, first they obviously present the gospel, and so like that's kind of like first stage is going through it chronologically, and then they go back and they connect the Old Testament and New Testament together. And then once you have people that are saved, then they do like separate Bible study stuff with them to disciple them. And so definitely in the tribal locations, you have very much the aspect of discipleship because you're kind of starting from zero and you have to go, work your way up. And since they don't have any ground already knowledge of Christ, and like most Americans do, they've heard of the Bible and some Bible stories probably, but they don't have any of that knowledge. So you kind of have to build on that. And that is one thing that's really important with disciple making, right? Is helping the people to grow. In the national church, I guess is what you could say it, I feel like it's kind of similar to the U.S. where you have like your normal services and your Sunday school stuff. I haven't attended very many national churches outside from like the school, so it's kind of hard for me to say. But yeah, so I don't really know that much about the national.
Sure.
But at the school, since we're all kind of one big family, there's very much the discipleship aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, I would expect it'd be a lot easier in that environment.
Yes.
Kind of like families, and you disciple your kids,
Yep.
and you have a lot of control.
Yeah.
So, Chloe, how do you, particularly after a few years of college and I don't know, learning more about the American church, how do you see the Japanese church because you've gone to some complete Japanese churches that were national and had a Japanese pastor, and then you've also seen what we've done. So how's your interpretation of how they apply disciple making in the Japanese church?
Well, for the national Japanese churches, they don't really have a discipleship aspect. Basically, the only thing you're expected to do is show up on Sundays, and if you do, they're super happy. Like the fact that I came every Sunday just made a lot of people really encouraged by the fact that I just showed up. So that's all that they're expecting. And there was one specific lady in the church she really wanted her neighbors and friends to get saved. So they would have like a Bible study at her house. But outside of that, I never heard of anything happening where it was like one-on-one or anybody meeting with anybody with the intention of growing. Mm-hmm. And I think they might have done something on Wednesdays sometimes where they would get together and pray, but I know it wasn't very many. So it's not really the expectation that you grow. They just want you to show up. And then clearly it was different for the evening because you were in charge of that. And if you've listened to this podcast for very long, he's a big proponent of discipleship. So that was definitely different, but yeah.
So growing up along the Amazon and getting to know Brazil and Brazilians, and I'm assuming there'd be a pretty big difference between tribal people and people that lived in the cities, but what is their background as far as, we're in Wisconsin right now, so most people are Catholic or Lutheran or nothing. So what would their background be? So when someone's hearing the gospel, what's their foundation they're hearing that from?
So Brazil as a whole is very Catholic. Since we are more remote, like our neighbors, we do outreach or evangelism with our neighbors. That would be, I guess, the high school version of Sunday school. That's what we would do. But they are Catholic, but since they live on the river and you have to take a boat to get to the nearest church, they're not very practicing. Like they're not practicing, but like they believe in the works side of it. So that very much you have to be careful with that, right? You have to approach it from keeping that in mind of they believe that you will be saved through your works. So that is especially more prevalent in like our neighbors. They definitely believe that. But then in the tribes, it's not so much. It depends really on how close they are to the nearest city and how much they've had contact with them. But most of them are like animistic, where you have spirits and all that. The spirit world is very, very active. And so you have to be careful also with how you address things, because they believe in the spirit world and where everything is a spirit, right? Like the trees, the water. And so that also plays into how you share the gospel with them.
All right. So I don't know how much, Chloe, that you know about that part of Japan, but do you know where most Japanese are?
I haven't haven't talked to a whole lot of people where they've shared specifically what they believe, unless it's just kind of, I know you've shared a lot of times that people to say, I don't really believe in anything. Mm-hmm. It's just, they don't really think about it. I know that I've heard some ladies talk to mom that would say, oh, they're scared of dying, but they don't believe that there's anything after death, that it's just nothingness, and so they're scared to think about it. Mm-hmm. So there's just not a lot of knowledge. They don't really believe in anything, and it scares them.
Yeah, I think officially most Japanese are agnostic, so they would say they haven't thought a lot about it, and when they do, it's scary, so they stop thinking about it. There probably are, behind that, more people who are animistic religions than anything else, and then some Buddhism and animism mixed together, but very much the spirit world. The God of the rocks and the trees. It's always been interesting to me. You go hiking and you see a tree and it has the things where people have sacrificed there in front of large trees or big rocks or high places. It's interesting. You read the Old Testament, you talk about the high places, and they always build altars on the high places. When Japan, most of the high places are also going to have altars on top of them. And that's just a big part of the culture, that animistic religion.
And, I guess I have met one lady that I got to know decently well that would be kind of like that type of religion where I would ask her, so do you believe there's a God? And she's like, well, I believe there are like gods, like there's something bigger than us, and that just everything has energy. And she goes to lots of like temples and shrines and things, and she's very interested in that aspect.
Yeah, some Japanese who are religious just kind of take everything. They're very eclectic, where they'll say, yeah, Christianity's great, and the God's awesome, and there's the spirit gods, and they just take a little bit of everything and make their own beliefs out of that. So none of it's grounded in something concrete where they can point to, I believe because of this truth. It's more this, I believe because it makes me happy. It makes it interesting to talk to people like that. There's just nothing concrete to talk about.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Growing up then in Brazil in that environment and coming back with the furloughs and all those kind of things, how has that contributed to your spiritual growth and who you are as a follower of Jesus today?
Can you clarify the question?
So,
sorry.
Maybe put it this way: what are some things that have helped you to grow throughout your life, whether it's from America or Brazil or people that have invested in you?
One thing, I don't know, that growing up as an MK, right, it's very easy to take your parents' faith, or like say, oh, since my parents believe, then I'm safe too. And so that was one thing that my parents were very clear on, is I have to believe for myself and not because they believe. And it was my own faith and not theirs. And so just having that emphasis of it's faith, it's personal. It's not based on the people around me, or that kind of a thing. And also, since I've been exposed to a lot of missionaries, we always were also very mission-minded, I guess. Like, everything was for the goal of sharing the gospel with others. And so, I don't know how to say this nicely, coming like to the U.S. where you would have people that didn't know very much about overseas missions and that kind of thing. It was kind of strange to me, where I was like, why would you not know about churches outside of the U.S., because it was always the gospel is for everyone and not just for me, or not just for certain people, but it's for everyone. And it should be our desire that everyone know the gospel. And so just that it's for everyone and that we should share it with everyone, but it has to be personal for each person. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
There's no expectations. You want to give it a stab, Chloe? Is it unclear enough for you?
Well, I know having experienced church life in both countries has just given me like a wider view of what Christianity is, and just showed me how, churches here don't really understand what it's like to be in a church in Japan and vice versa. But we all have the same God. We all have the same faith. It just expresses itself differently in different cultures. And so I don't know that I'm the best at like understanding what other cultures, how they live out the Christian life, but I do have an understanding that's broader because of having two experiences. So just, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely been good for me to experience more church life in America, because previously, like this year really is the first year that I've ever been in a church every Sunday, where you get to know the people, where you're exposed to the same preaching, the same, series or whatever we're going through, and getting to know one specific church. Whereas on furlough, I was always bouncing around and you never really got to know any one church. But kind of learning how they're different, and how not everything in every church is the only way. And I think that's a big thing. Going between both churches is going, okay, in Japan they did it like this. America definitely doesn't do it like that. In America they do it like this, and Japan, that would never fly, But that nothing is bad unless it's, unbiblical. But there's a lot of different ways to do things, and it's not necessarily sinful to be different.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the things I've been talking about on this podcast for a while, is thinking about the idea of essential ecclesiology or minimal ecclesiology. So it's like a definition of the church that is compact, like a seed. It's the analogy I've been using, where the seed contains everything that the church can be, but the seed planted in different cultures is going to grow into a different looking tree. It's the same tree. Like an oak tree is going to be an oak tree no matter where you plant it. An acorn grows into an oak. It doesn't grow into a maple or an apple tree. It's going to be an oak. But an oak tree planted beside a river is going to look different than an oak tree planted beside a dry field. They're going to grow up differently. One that's open and all the wind hits it versus the one that grows in a forest. It's more protected. So they're going to look different. They're going to have different forces that play on them. They're both oak trees. They both have fully developed into what they're supposed to be, but they do look different. But the seed is the same, and they both are supposed to bear fruit. Now, the one by the river might be more fruitful because it has more nutrients, or because it has plenty of water and all those kind of things. And the one that's planted in a dry, kind of barren place may grow, and it may bear very limited fruit. But if it bears fruit, it's accomplished its purpose. It's grown up to be a mature tree. It's fruitful, and I think that's part of this idea of the different churches in different cultures and the way that we do things. There is variety, but ultimately we're to grow up to be the church that God wants us to be. And hopefully, as we draw today to a close, you're doing the same where you are. And whatever you do, don't stop. Keep running.
Hi, this is Norman. Hopefully you have enjoyed this show today as we've talked to Chloe and Hope. One of the things I hope to do occasionally is to have opportunities to talk to young people like this, but not just young people, to talk to different people around the world who are pursuing Christ themselves in different contexts. So it's always interesting to me to hear from someone like Chloe and Hope, who have spent a lot of time in a different environment, in a different world, really, than where I grew up, or probably where you grew up. I think we can learn some things about life, about the way that we think about and do church, from people who grew up in different cultures, from people who have the opportunity to live in different cultures, and they have a different perspective. It's one thing that has challenged me as I've had that opportunity to live in another culture for a long period of time. I've had that opportunity to evaluate my own culture, to learn some lessons from the other culture, that there are things that they do well. Now, I've been the last 20 years in, like Chloe said, a cold culture, one where it seems like things do move slowly. The church often is struggling, and they're saying, in the next 15 to 20 years, half the churches could be without a pastor. So there's definitely a struggle there. Well, what lessons can we learn from a church that is in that environment? They don't have persecution, though in that way they're similar to the United States, but they have struggles. They have a slowly aging society. They have churches that are small and that struggle with having any kind of impact in their community. And I think that's something a lot of churches in the United States are slowly moving toward, is an older church that struggles to relate to younger people in their community and struggles to understand the relevance of the church, of the existence of God. And it's not that God's not relevant. It's not that the church is not relevant. It's that the church doesn't know how to share the relevance. They don't know how to speak to the lives of people who are completely unlike them, particularly in cases where you have churches where the majority of the people have been believers for a very long time. They have fewer and fewer really close friends who are outside the church. So they lose the ability over time really to speak truth and love to the world around them. They become more and more disconnected. I think that's a real struggle. So they have the same questions in Japan. We have some of those questions that are growing in the United States. How do we turn that around? Well, I do believe that we have to be disciples and disciple makers. We have to be pursuing Christ ourselves, to be like him, to be on mission, to be growing in our ability to share the gospel, to lead small groups, to invest in the lives of other believers, to help them to grow to the point of being able to follow Jesus well. So thanks for joining me today. Send me a note at runwithnorman@runwithhorses.net. I'd love to hear from you. Whatever you do, do not stop. Keep running. It is worth it. It's worth all the effort that it takes to continue to follow Jesus.